All right, you virtue signaling assholes, let's cut the crap. It's Remembrance Day, and, the drill slap on a poppy, look somber for a couple of minutes and pretend you give a shit.
You're not wrong about the performative
But
aspect.
seriously, how much do you really know about this whole Remembrance Day charade?
Yeah, it's one of those things that everyone thinks they know.
It's a total mindfuck when you dig into the history of it all.
Oh, absolutely. It's got a fascinating and kind of messed up history.
Damn straight. And that's why we've got our expert here today, ready to drop some serious knowledge bombs on this whole war-worshipping circus.
I'll do my best.
So let's get this shit show on the road. What the hell is Remembrance Day really all about?
Well, it all started with the end of World War I, November 11th, 1918, 11:00 a.m.
Or
sharp.
clockwork.
That's when the fighting finally stopped.
Everyone just said, fuck it, I'm going home.
Pretty much. They called it Armistice Day, marking the moment everyone decided they were too damn tired to keep killing each other.
Makes sense. Wars are exhausting, I guess.
I can't imagine.
Hold up. Wasn't the Treaty of Versailles, the one that officially ended the damn war, signed way later? On June 28th, 1919? So why wasn't that the big day, huh?
Good point. The armistice was all about stopping the bloodshed right then and there in the trenches.
Got to stop the bleeding, so to speak.
Exactly. The treaty was more about the politicians, all their messy power games, dividing the spoils of war and pointing fingers.
So basically they were too busy squabbling over who got to keep what to bother with a proper celebration.
Pretty much.
Typical.
Anyway, after World War II rolled around and fucked everything up again, things got even more complicated. Some countries, like the good old US of A, stuck with the whole Armistice Day thing.
Those Americans love their traditions.
Right. But they decided to rebrand it as Veterans Day, to be inclusive and all that.
Politically correct, war remembered.
Exactly. But the Commonwealth countries, they went for the whole doom and gloom route and renamed it Remembrance Day.
Yeah, 2 world wars in a few decades will definitely put a damper on the party mood.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about all the weird shit the Commonwealth countries do on Remembrance Day. They've got a whole goddamn playbook for this somber crap.
Right, there's the 2-minute silence at 11 a.m. on the dot observed across the Commonwealth. It's supposed to be a time to reflect on the sacrifices made by those who served and died in the wars.
2 minutes, huh? Is that like a minute per world war or something? What's the deal with that?
Haha. It's a nice way to think about it. The idea is to give people a moment to pause and remember.
To contemplate the futility of it all.
I guess you could say that. And then there's the whole bugle call thing, the last post and reveille.
Those mournful tunes.
Exactly. Kind of creepy if you think about it, like they're symbolically putting the soldiers to sleep and then waking them up again.
Sounds like some necromancer bullshit to me.
Yeah.
But hey, at least it's a bit more interesting than just standing there in silence. And then we've got the wreath-laying ceremony where everyone tries to build a goddamn flower fort around the war memorials.
Actually, wreath-laying has been around for ages, going all the way back to ancient Greece and Rome. It's a way of paying respects to the dearly departed, showing them some love, even though they're 6 feet under.
So we're just copying the ancients.
Yeah.
Figures. All right, let's head down under for a minute. Australia. They've got their own unique take on Remembrance Day, right?
Oh, yeah. Down in Australia, Remembrance Day gets kind of overshadowed by Anzac Day, which they celebrate on April 25th. It commemorates the landing of Australian and New Zealand forces at Gallipoli during World War I.
Yeah, I've heard of that. So it's like a national holiday pissing contest down there.
Yeah.
Who can commemorate their war dead better?
Maybe a little bit. Anzac Day has become this massive national event, a public holiday, and it's all about mateship, humor and that Aussie stoicism. They celebrate the spirit of the soldiers, the whole Anzac legend, instead of just dwelling on the sadness of war.
Sounds more like a party than a memorial service. Guess those Aussies just don't like to get bogged down in the doom and gloom.
You could say that.
But what about our buddies up north? What's Remembrance Day like in Canada?
Canada takes Remembrance Day pretty seriously. They've got this massive national ceremony in Ottawa with the Governor General, the Prime Minister, a Silver Cross mother, even a fly past by the Air Force.
The whole 9 yards, huh? They go all out.
They do. So do Canadians get the day off work to, properly mourn their war dead?
Or to just get shit-faced and forget about it?
Well, that's actually a hot topic in Canada. Some people think it should be a national holiday,
Makes sense.
while others say it's better to have schools open so kids can learn about the significance of the day.
Brainwashing the youth, classic move.
Mark.
Anything else special about the Canadian Remembrance Day experience?
Well, after the official ceremony, people lay poppies on the tomb of the unknown soldier. It's a pretty moving gesture.
Okay, that's kind of sweet.
Mhm.
So we've covered the Aussies and the Canucks, but what about the rest of the world? Is everyone as obsessed with Remembrance Day as the Commonwealth?
It depends. The UK has Remembrance Sunday, the Sunday closest to November 11th. It's super somber with a big parade and that iconic Tower of London poppy display.
Yeah, that's a pretty impressive sight. Though kind of morbid when you think about it.
It's definitely a statement. France and Belgium go all out and make it a national holiday. And the US, of course, does their own thing with Veterans Day on the same date.
Those Yanks always got to be different. What about the rest of the world? Are they getting in on this Remembrance Day action?
In India, it seems like they only really acknowledge it in Bangalore and a couple of cemeteries.
Priorities, right. So it seems like everyone's got their own way of remembering the war dead. Some more somber than others. But here's a thought. With all this pomp and circumstance, all these rituals and traditions, are we really honoring the dead, or are we just glorifying war? It's a fucked up question, but one worth asking, don't you think?
Absolutely. It's a question we need to grapple with if we want Remembrance Day to be more than just an empty ritual.
Deep thoughts from the expert, folks. We'll be right back after a quick break to dig even deeper into this Remembrance Day bullshit.
So where were we?
Oh, right. We were talking about all the ways we pretend to give a shit about war dead.
Ah, yes, the rituals of Remembrance Day.
Rituals, my ass. It's all just a big circle jerk of grief and guilt.
No, let's not be too cynical.
Cynical. I'm just being realistic.
Yeah.
We slap on a poppy stand in silence for a couple of minutes and then go back to our regularly scheduled programming.
I think there's more to it than that.
Oh, really?
Enlighten me.
Take the 2-minute silence, for example. Did you know that it was actually inspired by a South African newspaper editor?
Seriously. Some ink-stained asshat came up with the whole silent treatment thing.
His name was Sir Percy Fitzpatrick, and back in 1919, he proposed a 5-minute pause for reflection.
5 minutes? That's a long-ass time to just stand there like a bunch of mutes.
Well, King George V liked the idea, but decided to shorten it to 2 minutes.
Probably figured people would get bored and start picking their noses.
And that's how it became a core part of Remembrance Day across the empire.
So this Fitzpatrick dude is responsible for all those awkward silences at war memorials? What a legacy.
Yeah.
But hey, at least it's better than having to listen to some politician drone on about patriotism and sacrifice. Speaking of traditions, let's talk about those bugle calls, the last post, and reveille.
Oh yeah, the musical equivalent of a funeral dirge.
They've been used in military settings for centuries, but on Remembrance Day, they take on a whole new meaning. They represent the cycle of life and death.
Life, death, and a whole lot of bullshit.
The last post signals the end. The soldier's final sleep reveille symbolizes awakening a new dawn.
Okay, that's kind of poetic, but it still feels a bit morbid, don't you think?
Right.
Blasting those bugle calls at a war memorial is like saying, "Nighty-night, sleep tight, don't let the bedbugs bite. Oh, and by the way, you're all fucking dead." Kind of a buzzkill, right?
I see your point, but the idea is to honor the sacrifice of those who gave their lives for their country.
Right, because nothing says thank you for your service, like a mournful trumpet solo.
It's about acknowledging the weight of their sacrifice and remembering that their deaths were not in vain.
Yeah, whatever. All right, let's not dwell on the morbid stuff. Let's talk about the poppy. Is that just a fashion statement for the war remembrance crowd or what?
The poppy has a fascinating history.
Oh, I'm sure it does. But spare me the history lesson. Just tell me, what's the big deal with wearing a poppy?
The poppy became a symbol of remembrance thanks to a Canadian physician, Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae.
Another one of those do-gooder types.
During World War I, he wrote a poem called In Flanders Fields, where he describes poppies blooming amidst the graves of fallen soldiers.
So we're honoring dead soldiers with a flower that's basically saying, hey, look at all these corpses fertilizing the soil. Pretty damn dark, if you ask me.
The poem and the image of the poppy struck a chord with people. They started wearing poppies to remember the fallen, and it quickly became a global tradition.
So the next time I see someone sporting a poppy, I should just give them a knowing nod and say, yeah, corpses, man, lots and lots of corpses.
I wouldn't recommend that.
All right, enough with the poppy talk. Let's get back to how different countries do their Remembrance Day thing. You mentioned that Australia goes all out for Anzac Day. Why is that such a big fucking deal for them?
The Gallipoli campaign, which Anzac Day commemorates, was a major turning point for Australia. It was their first major military action as a nation.
And they got their asses kicked, right?
Well, it was a defeat, yes. But it helped forge a sense of national identity and pride.
Wait, they're celebrating a loss? That's a pretty messed up way to boost national morale.
It wasn't just about the loss. It was about the courage and resilience shown by the Australian soldiers.
The old "we lost, but we fought bravely" spin.
Anzac Day is about commemorating that spirit, The Anzac Legend, as they call it. It's about mateship courage and facing adversity head-on.
So they spun a military fuck-up into a national myth. Fair enough. But back to Remembrance Day.
Yeah.
You mentioned Canada has a pretty intense ceremony. What's the deal with that? What's the whole story behind all that pomp and circumstance?
Canada's National Remembrance Day ceremony is steeped in tradition and symbolism. The Governor-General, who represents the monarch, lays a wreath at the National War Memorial, followed by the Prime Minister and other dignitaries.
Sounds a lot like the Canadian shindig. Lots of important people standing around looking all somber and shit. But what's with the whole poppy display at the Tower of London? Isn't that a bit much? I mean, it's impressive and all, but isn't it a little over the top?
The Tower of London poppy display is supposed to be a powerful visual representation of the scale of sacrifice during World War I. Each poppy represents a British or Commonwealth soldier who died in the war.
Yeah, but it still feels a bit excessive, don't you think? It's like they're trying to make a statement, but it just comes across as a bit creepy. Like they're saying, look at all these dead soldiers, aren't we great at war? It's just weird, man.
I see what you mean. But the intention is to honor the fallen and remind people of the sheer magnitude of the losses during the war.
Yeah, I get it. But let's move on from the UK already. What about other countries? How do they mark Remembrance Day? Do they all have their own quirky traditions and ceremonies?
Well, in France and Belgium, Remembrance Day, or Armistice Day as they still call it, is a national holiday. They hold ceremonies at war memorials and cemeteries, and it's a time for national reflection on the sacrifices made during both world wars.
So they actually get a day off to mourn their war dead. Lucky bastards.
What about the U.S.? They always have to do their own thing, right?
Yes. The U.S. observes Veterans Day on November 11th. It's a federal holiday honoring all veterans, both living and dead, who have served in the U.S. Armed Forces.
So they just lump all their veterans together no matter what war they fought in. Seems kind of lazy, don't you think? But hey, they get a day off.
Well, the U.S. has a long and complex military history with veterans from many different conflicts. Veterans Day is meant to be a day of national unity, recognizing the service and sacrifice of all those who have worn the uniform.
Right. They're all about inclusivity and shit. But let's be honest, Veterans Day is just an excuse for a 3-day weekend and some mattress sales. Not exactly a solemn occasion, is it?
Well, the way it's observed might vary, but the underlying intention is to show appreciation for the service of veterans. Sure. But let's get back to the global picture. You mentioned that India doesn't make a big deal out of Remembrance Day. Why is that? Did they just forget to put it on their calendar or what?
India's experience with World War I was a bit different from that of the other Commonwealth countries. Indian soldiers fought bravely in the war, but India was still under British rule at the time. So there wasn't the same sense of national ownership over the conflict.
So they were basically fighting someone else's war. No wonder they don't give a shit about Remembrance Day. It's not exactly a proud moment in their history.
It's a complex issue, but their historical context is certainly different from that of the other nations we've discussed.
Okay, fair enough. So we've got a bunch of countries doing their own thing on Remembrance Day, some more seriously than others. But here's the real question. With all these different approaches, are we really doing a good job of honoring the war dead? Or are we just going through the motions, pretending to care while we go about our lives?
That's a thought-provoking question, and it's one we should all be asking ourselves as we navigate the complexities of remembrance and commemoration.
All right, so we've spent the last hour ripping on Remembrance Day traditions.
Deconstructing the narratives, I believe, is the term.
But let's be real for a minute. Are we actually honoring the dead, or are we just jerking off to war?
Well, that's a rather blunt way to put it.
Cut the crap. I'm tired of the euphemisms.
Fair enough. I think there's a tension between remembrance and glorification that we need to address.
Damn straight. On one hand, we've got all the somber ceremonies, the poppies, the 2 minutes of awkward silence. It's all very respectful, very touchy-feely. But on the other hand, you can't help but feel like they're trying to sell us on the whole war is hell, but it also makes this badass narrative.
Remembrance Day is meant to be a time to reflect on the sacrifices made by those who served, to acknowledge the horrors of war and to work towards peace. It's about remembering the past and learning from it.
Yeah, I get all that. But let's be real. There's also a shit ton of nationalism mixed in with all that somber reflection. It's all about pride in military might. I mean, those Remembrance Day parades are basically just a chance for the military to show off their shiny new toys and strut their stuff.
I wouldn't say it's just about showing off.
Oh, come on. You're telling me those fighter jets screaming overhead aren't a bit of a dig measuring contest?
Parades are a traditional part of military culture. They're a way to demonstrate discipline and unity, but I agree that there's a fine line between honoring those who served and glorifying war itself.
And that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
How the hell do we remember the sacrifices without accidentally making war seem like some glorious adventure? How do we separate the respect for the soldiers from the glorification of the whole damn war machine?
That is the challenge.
Because let's face it, war is fucking horrific. It's brutal, it's senseless, it leaves scars both physical and psychological. And yet, we still find ways to romanticize it, to turn it into something noble, something heroic.
It's a complex issue. There's a natural human tendency to find meaning in suffering, to create narratives that help us make sense of tragedy.
So we create these myths, these stories about heroism and sacrifice, to make ourselves feel better about the whole fucked up mess.
In a way, yes, but it's also about honoring those who served, to acknowledge their courage, their commitment, their willingness to put themselves in harm's way for their country.
I get that.
Yeah.
But how do we do that without sugarcoating the reality of war, without turning it into some kind of patriotic fairy tale?
I think it's crucial to focus on the individual stories of those who serve, to highlight the human cost of war and to emphasize the importance of peace. It's about remembering that behind every casualty statistic, there's a human being with a family and a story.
All right, so less parades, more personal stories. Got it. But what about all the war memorials? Aren't they kind of glorifying war too? I mean, they're basically giant statues dedicated to kicking ass and taking names.
War memorials can serve different purposes. Some are meant to be grand and imposing, while others are more intimate and reflective. The key is to approach them with a critical eye, to consider the message they convey and the context in which they were created. It's about asking questions and engaging with the history, rather than just blindly accepting the narrative.
So we should be questioning those bronze badasses, not just blindly saluting them. Sounds good to me. But here's another thing that bugs me, the whole hero label. Don't get me wrong, I respect the hell out of those who served. But are we throwing around the hero word a little too loosely? Are we cheapening the word by applying it to everyone who puts on a uniform?
I think that's a valid concern. The term hero is often used to describe soldiers, but it's important to remember that they're individuals with their own motivations and experiences. Not every soldier sees themselves as a hero, and some may even struggle with the label.
Exactly. They're just people doing a job, often a shitty and dangerous one. But we slap a medal on them, call them heroes, and suddenly they're these larger-than-life figures. It's almost like we're dehumanizing them in the process.
I think it's important to recognize the complexity of their experiences, to avoid simplistic labels, and to listen to their stories with empathy and understanding. It's about seeing them as individuals, not just cogs in the war machine.
All right, so less hero worship, more human connection. I can dig that. But here's the real question. How the fuck do we prevent future wars? I mean, if Remembrance Day is all about honoring the sacrifices and learning from the past, shouldn't it also be about making damn sure we don't repeat those mistakes? Shouldn't it be about more than just empty gestures and somber reflections?
It absolutely should be. Remembrance Day should be a catalyst for dialogue about peace, about conflict resolution, about the need to address the root causes of war. It's about looking beyond the battlefield and understanding the political and social forces that lead to conflict.
So it's not just about looking back, but also about looking forward. Sounds like a pretty tall order. But hey, if we can remember all those names etched in stone, surely we can remember to not be such warmongering assholes in the future, right?
One can only hope. The key is to keep the conversation going, to challenge the narratives that glorify war, and to work towards a future where conflict is resolved through diplomacy and understanding, rather than violence and bloodshed.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive into the glorification and remembrance of war. Thanks for listening, you patriotic bastards. We'll catch you next time for another dose of historical cynicism and unfiltered truth.